Welcome back to You Be the Judge. Tom, before the break, we were talking about the system now that exists that runs all the way to the Court of Veterans' Appeals and to allowing lawyers to become involved in the veterans process. When lawyers were first involved in the veterans process, they set a fee at $250. That was in the Civil War.
That was Abe Lincoln.
Didn't change until 1980, when lawyers were allowed to appear before a new court called the Court of Veterans' Appeals. And then what they found out is every appeal that went to the Court of Veterans' Appeals needed to be remanded because the record hadn't been made complete. So they allowed lawyers to appear before hearing officers at an earlier stage and charge a contingency fee. But the fact of the matter is, with thousands and thousands of lawyers that are doing veterans law now, there's still a total lack of understanding on how to do things and how to get them started. And you need and depend on a person like Carrie to tell you, hey, this is where you need to go from here. And you need someone occasionally to hand a case off to.
You know, Terry mentioned something earlier with regard to the Vietnam vets who have done a remarkable job because of their experiences when they came back of trying to get their benefits, of organizing themselves to the point where they really have a lot to offer the newer veterans who are coming out. But unfortunately, and Carrie alluded to this earlier, there's a certain stigma with regard to returning veterans who look at the injuries they may have sustained while in their service, and they maybe don't match up to the losses that their buddies have suffered.
And that's been consistently.
Right, and that, I mean, that speaks well for those individual veterans, but unfortunately that, over time, hurts that veteran. And Carrie, why don't you talk a little bit about how you start the claims for individuals when they come to see you, and why that's important to come to see you as soon as they realize.
They have to realize that it's important to get the process started as soon as they return. I mean, if they have an injury, as you had indicated, and you said earlier, and you said again, it worsens over time. I mean, there's things that happen, and they need to make it a part of the record. They need to get the information in the record so they know, and let the basis for the claim be whatever the basis may be. And if it worsens or there's a residual because of it, or other issues that happen over time as we get older, you know, they may have a shoulder issue that was minimal, but then now it's worsened over time, that has caused them to where they can't work as good as they used to. Well, that was something that was occurred or made worse while in service, and that's part of the criteria for making it military or service connected. You know, there's a criteria that says it's got to be something that was acquired or that was made worse while in or happened while in active duty service. And then the second criteria for that is the chronology of it worsening over time, right, and then the medical connection between the two. That's how they determine service connected. And I think it's important that these young guys realize that these, as you had indicated, the Vietnam vets have worked over many years. They've done a great job of developing these organizations and these groups that they have, and they're at the vet centers. They're all over the place. And I mean, you know, they can reach our office, they can reach the vet centers in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre and different communities. They can call, I'm sure, the reps' offices. They have them at the community centers, and some of them. And these Vietnam vets have done a great job of developing these groups of guys who have been through this hardship over 20 and 30 years and been through the suffering and the pain. And these can eliminate this for these young guys coming out. They just have to eliminate the stigma that it's because I have my arms and legs, and God forbid I say it that way, but that's the way it is, right, that I don't have an injury. Right. But it's a different form of an injury. It's still an injury, right, and it exists.
Why don't you tell me a little bit of how the gentleman who injured his shoulder that you were talking about, if he comes to your office, what do you do? How do you start the process?
Well, what we do is we take, first of all, we have to take what's called a 2122. It's a power of attorney, which means we can act on their behalf. And we act on their behalf against the Veterans Administration. And what we do is we take that, and then we take a claim. And we fill out the claim. And the claim basically tells their chronology of their life. You know, where they were born, their service, if they're married, if they're not married, their injury, the date of service, where they're being where they're being treated for the injury, how it happened, and any issues they've had with it. It's important that on the same, you know, on both sides, that we get as much detailed information from the veteran and as much paperwork and as much as the records, as like Tom was indicating before, the records are a challenge, that we get that for them as much as possible to have the best possible case, so we can make it go through the system, because as you hear, there's nightmares in the VA, you know, records and years and losses, and so that's important that we start that process there. So when we bring them into that process, then what we do is we take it down to Philadelphia and we file. And then it goes into what's called the way the VA operates, and they're changing it around a little bit, but there's a developmental stage. It goes in and it comes in, and there's a mail, and they sort it, and it depends upon the amount of claims and what traffic and lane it can go. And so they have a whole new process they're working on, and then it goes to rating and development and so forth, and that's kind of how it works. I mean, I'm not necessarily putting them in the right order, but
Right, and when you speak about rating, just so everybody watching the show knows, I mean, the VA rates in percentages, so 10% to 20%.
it's kind of
And then they have their own confusing math that they do, where 10% and 10% don't equal 20%, it equals 19%, and there's all kinds of formulas, which I'm not going to bore all of us here with, but it's a special kind of math that you see nowhere else other than with the VA.
It's confusing, and but when I sit veterans down and explain them to them, believe it or not, somebody explain, and that's a lot of the problems with this. Nobody explains to them.
Right.
Nobody tells them. You know, as much as it may hurt me, I tell a veteran, you know, I guarantee you one thing, and the only thing I guarantee you is I'll do all the paperwork I can, and I'll help you as much as I can with the process. I don't guarantee you anything, and I can't, because I'd be wrong in saying that. And I think that's where some of the people get misconfused. And I think that people also realize there's county veteran people that help, but they help, you know, they're more focused on taxes and local levels, where we are more of a medical side. So, and I think that's where they need to make the calls or check with them.
And there are a lot of confusing things with regard to the filing for these claims. Todd alluded to the fact that there's these different levels within the VA now to try and assist veterans in getting the benefits, and he alluded to the Court of Appeals for the Veterans Affairs. Taking it beyond that, the laws have now provided as well, on a limited basis, they can also appeal to federal district courts as well as Court of Appeals for the down in Washington, D.C. So they have tried to modernize the system. But I think, you know, one thing we heard was, oh, these cases can take long. And I think that dissuades a lot of the people who could be eligible, because they think this is going to last forever and it's not worth it to me. But the misnomer there is the fact that it may take a while, but that's just because, unlike other cases, these cases don't necessarily end. If your condition continues to worsen, you continue to have reasons to appeal your claim higher to get a higher rating. So I think that might dissuade some veterans as well.
And I think the worst thing that you could say is that my claim isn't worthy of, or my benefit isn't, or the frustrating process. You know what? It's a frustrating process, but it needs to be gotten through by these veterans.
Sure it does, and it's tremendously important. If someone comes into our office, Gary, can we call you, send them down to you, and you'll take care of them?
No problem.
And
more than
that's,
happy
I think
to.
people need to understand that you know, you need to have somebody who is qualified to help you, and we are fortunate that with our state of Pennsylvania, that you got folks that go to your state representative's offices. I know you were brought to my attention, the great work that you do, by Tom Welby, who works with Representative Marty Flynn. And he said, hey, Todd, this guy is fantastic. He comes up, he meets the veterans, he solves all the problems that we aren't qualified to do. And we're just glad to have you on the show to let people know that there are folks like you out there, and that they really need to take care of themselves by going to the right people.
And we appreciate the opportunity, and they need to realize that, you know, that I'm not the only organization, but there's plenty of organizations out there to help them.
When we come back, we'll have some additional thoughts about the veterans process and what can be done if you're a veteran with a disability. So please stay tuned to You Be the Judge. Todd O'Malley again. If you're hurt or sick, can't work, Social Security could be the answer. Grab your cell phone. Call the lawyers at O'Malley & Langen, 1-800-817-2667. And remember, we don't get paid unless you win.